The sun hung like a molten coin over the Nebraska plains, turning the prairie grass into a sea of gold. The heat was the kind that made rattlesnakes seek shade and turned a man's thoughts sluggish. Sheriff Elias McCade rode slow along the railroad service track, his dun mare flicking her ears at the buzz of cicadas. His mind was split between the unpaid taxes waiting on his desk and the eerie stillness of the land, until a scream shattered the quiet. Not the cry of an animal, but something human, raw and desperate. Elias spurred his horse forward, the rhythm of hooves matching the sudden hammering of his heart. Another scream came weaker this time, frayed at the edges. The rails beneath him hummed a low warning. In the distance, the whistle of the 315 to Cheyenne cut through the air, still miles off, but closing fast. Dust kicked up as he galloped, stinging his eyes, but through the haze, he saw them, a woman, splayed across the tracks like a discarded doll, her wrists and ankles lashed to the iron rails. A baby swaddled in a tattered quilt lay on her chest, its faint cries lost in the wind. "Hold on," Elias shouted, though he wasn't sure she could hear him. The train's whistle screamed again, closer now. He leaped from his horse before it fully stopped, his boots hitting the dirt with a thud. The woman's eyes locked onto his wide with terror, but sharp with defiance. Her lips moved, but the only word he caught was, "Please." Elias worked fast, his knife slicing through the ropes at her wrists first. The baby's face was flushed, its tiny fingers clutching at the woman's dress. The knots at her ankles were tighter, the rope biting into her skin. Behind him, the ground trembled. The train was a black smudge on the horizon, growing larger by the second. "Can you stand?" he asked, hauling her up. Her legs gave way and she crumpled against him. No time. He scooped the baby into one arm and dragged her clear just as the train's shadow swallowed the tracks. The engine roared past, its wind whipping at their clothes, the sound deafening. When the last car vanished into the distance, the woman, her name was Lillian, he'd learned, collapsed into the grass, sobbing. The baby wailed its voice, finally loud enough to be heard. Elias knelt beside them, his hands shaking. "Who did this to you?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. The faded bandana around the baby's bundle bore the mark of the Blackwood Gang, a jagged B stitched in red. Lillian's voice was a whisper. "They said the railroad took their land. They wanted the train to see what they'd done." Elias clenched his jaw. The Blackwoods were no strangers to cruelty, but this was something else. He helped her onto his horse, the baby cradled between them. As they rode toward town, the sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of vengeance. Somewhere out there, the Blackwoods were laughing, but not for long. The train's horn howled like a wounded beast as Elias dragged Lillian and the baby clear, their bodies hitting the dirt just as the iron monster thundered past. Heat and cinders lashed at them, the wind roaring like a stampede. When the last car vanished, the silence that followed was deafening. Lillian lay gasping in the scrub grass, her fingers clutching the baby little grace she'd whispered earlier, like she was the last solid thing in the world. Elias knelt beside her, his hands rough but careful, as he checked her wounds. The rope burns on her wrists were angry and raw, but it was the hollow look in her eyes that unsettled him. "They took my wedding ring," she murmured suddenly, her voice cracked. "Ripped it right off my finger." Her hand trembled as she held it up, the pale stripe of skin, a stark reminder of what the Blackwoods had stolen. Elias clenched his jaw. This wasn't just cruelty, it was a message. He helped her onto his horse. Grace tucked between them, her tiny fists curled against Lillian's torn dress. As they rode, the sun bled into the horizon, painting the prairie in shades of fire. That's when he saw it, a lone rider silhouetted on a distant ridge, watching. The man didn't move, didn't speak, just sat there like a vulture waiting for carrion. Elias's hand drifted to his Colt. "Blackwood?" he asked lowly. Lillian stiffened. "No," she whispered. "Worse, that's Silas Rook." The name hit Elias like a rifle shot. Rook wasn't just another outlaw. He was the Blackwood Gang's enforcer, a man who left no witnesses. And he'd just seen them alive. The horse picked up its pace as Elias urged it toward his ranch, the shadows stretching long behind them. Lillian's breath was warm against his neck, her voice barely audible over the wind. "They won't stop coming now." Elias didn't answer. He didn't need to. The weight of his revolver and the child in his arms were answer enough. Somewhere behind them a coyote yipped, or maybe it was a signal. Out here the line between predator and prey was razor thin. By the time the ranch came into view, the first stars pricked the sky. The porch light burned yellow in the window, a beacon in the gathering dark. But Elias didn't relax. He knew better. Men like Rook didn't ride alone, and night in the Nebraska territory belonged to the wolves. As he lifted Lillian down, her legs buckled again. This time she didn't apologize, just met his gaze with a fire that hadn't been there before. "You got a spare gun?" she asked. Grace stirred in her arms, and Elias felt something cold and certain settle in his chest. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. The ranch house stood silent under a sky streaked with the last red embers of sunset. Elias carried Lillian inside her body, limp, but her fingers still curled tight around the edge of his coat. Mary, his sister, the only family he had left, took one look at the baby in his arms and moved like lightning. Her hands, calloused from years of ranch work, were surprisingly gentle as she peeled back the tattered quilt to check little Grace. "She's dehydrated," Mary muttered, already reaching for the tin cup by the wash basin. "And this one's worse." Lillian stirred on the narrow bed as Mary pressed a damp cloth to her forehead. Her eyes flew open wild and unseeing for a heartbeat before locking onto Grace. "She's alive." The words came out cracked like dry riverbed mud. "Alive and fighting," Mary said, but Elias saw the way her jaw tightened. The baby's lips were chapped, her breath too quick. Ranch life had taught them both the look of a body pushed too far. A floorboard creaked as Elias stepped back. The weight of the day pressed down on him, the train, the ropes, Silas Rook watching from the ridge like death itself. He reached for his rifle above the hearth. Mary's voice stopped him. "Where do you think you're going?" "To check the perimeter." "You think they'll come tonight?" Lillian's hand shot out, gripping his wrist. Her fingers were cold, but her eyes burned. "Rook doesn't wait. He hunts." As if summoned, the first howl cut through the night, not a coyote, but a signal. Close. Too close. Elias met Mary's gaze across the room. Without a word, she handed Grace to Lillian and yanked open the cedar chest at the foot of the bed. Inside, wrapped in burlap, lay a second revolver, oiled and loaded. Lillian stared at it, then at Mary. "You keep a spare under your linens." Mary's smile was all teeth. "This is Nebraska, sweetheart. We don't have the luxury of surprises." Outside, the wind carried the sound of hoofbeats, soft but deliberate. Elias blew out the lamp. In the sudden dark, Grace let out a whimper, quickly muffled against Lillian's shoulder. Then silence. A boot scraped dirt near the porch. A saddle creaked. Elias thumbed back the hammer of his Winchester. The Blackwoods had made their move. So would he. The morning sun painted the ranch in golden hues. As Anna stood by the fence, her fingers absently tracing the fresh scars on her wrists. Jane slept soundly against her chest, wrapped in one of Mary's spare quilts, a small comfort in this strange new world. The distant rail line glinted like a snake's back in the sunlight, and Anna's throat tightened. That's where they'd left her. That's where Silas Rook would come from. Charles approached quietly, the scent of leather and hard work clinging to him. He leaned against the fence post, following her gaze towards the horizon. "Smoke's been drifting in since dawn," he said, nodding toward the hazy western sky. "Could be a prairie fire. Could be something else." Anna's grip on Jane tightened. "It's them." The words tasted like gunpowder. "Blackwood burns his mark into everything he touches." A shadow crossed Charles's face. He'd heard the stories farms set ablaze with families still inside cattle shot dead in their pastures. The Blackwood Gang didn't just steal, they erased. Inside the house, Mary's voice carried through the open window as she taught young Jed how to load a shotgun. "2 shells just like I showed you. And for God's sake, don't point it at anything you're not willing to kill." Anna turned abruptly, her eyes sharp. "You're preparing for war." Charles met her gaze. "We're preparing to survive." That night, the wind carried the distant echo of gunshots, 3 sharp cracks that sent the coyotes into a frenzy. Anna stood vigil at the window, Jane clutched to her chest. Charles joined her, his rifle propped against the wall. "Stagecoach robbery, most likely," he murmured. "Blackwood's men hit the Cheyenne route this time of month." Anna's voice was steel wrapped in velvet. "He's getting closer." A floorboard creaked behind them. Mary stood in the doorway, her gray braid over one shoulder, a revolver tucked into her apron. "Jed spotted riders half a mile east," she said. 3 of them, moving slow. Charles reached for his rifle, but Anna's hand on his arm stopped him. Her eyes gleamed in the lamplight, not with fear, but with cold, clear purpose. "Let me talk to them first," she said. Mary's eyebrows shot up. "The hell you will." Anna was already unwrapping the sling from around her shoulders, passing Jane to Mary. "They think I'm dead. That gives us an edge." She reached into the cedar chest and pulled out Jed's spare knife, testing its weight. "Besides," she added, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "I owe Silas Rook a conversation." The wind howled through the cottonwoods as Anna stepped onto the porch, the knife hidden in her skirts. Somewhere in the darkness, a horse snorted. A spur jingled. The hunt was on. The morning air hung thick with the scent of sagebrush as Anna's confession settled over the ranch like dust after a stampede. Charles kept his hands busy oiling the porch hinges, but his gut twisted at her words. The screen door squeaked under his fingers, a small, ordinary sound that felt wrong against the weight of what she'd survived. Mary set aside her mending with deliberate calm. "Your husband's people," she said, her voice deceptively light. "They got a name." Anna's fingers stilled on Jane's blanket. "Blackwood." The name hit like a rifle shot. Charles's head snapped up. The Blackwood Gang didn't just run cattle rustlers, they were kin, and kin meant blood feuds. Mary's needle flashed as she threaded it anew. "Well now," she said, stabbing the cloth with more force than necessary, "that explains why they used rails instead of bullets. Family likes to keep their murders tidy." A coyote yipped in the distance, too close. Anna's head jerked toward the sound, her body tensing like a bowstring. Jane whimpered in her sleep. Charles wiped his hands on his jeans and stood. "We need to—" The rifle shot cracked before he finished. Splinters exploded from the porch rail near Anna's shoulder. Down. Charles tackled them both as the second shot tore through the wash line, sending clothespins flying. Mary was already moving her skirts, whipping, as she dove inside and came up with 2 rifles. She tossed one to Charles, just as 3 riders burst from the cottonwood grove, dusty, hard-eyed men with Blackwood's jagged B burned into their saddle leather. The lead rider, a gaunt man with a silver-starred hat, reined up just shy of the yard. "Hand over the woman," he called, "and we'll make it quick for the rest of you." Anna stood slowly, Jane clutched tight. When she spoke, her voice carried across the yard like a blade. "Tell Silas Rook his brother's widow says hello." The rider's face went slack. That split-second hesitation was all Charles needed. His rifle barked once, and the silver-starred hat went spinning into the dirt. Chaos erupted. Mary's shotgun boomed from the kitchen window, peppering the second rider's horse. The animal reared, throwing its rider into the water trough. The third outlaw wheeled his mount, but not fast enough. Anna snatched the knife from Mary's apron and let fly. The blade found its mark hilt deep in the man's thigh. As the gun smoke cleared, Charles grabbed Anna's arm. "You said widow." Her smile was all sharp edges. "Did I forget to mention I buried my knife in my husband's throat before they tied me to those tracks?" Somewhere beyond the ridge, a train whistle blew. The 3:15 to Cheyenne, right on time. The basin water rippled as Anna wrung out the cloth, her reflection fracturing in the droplets. Charles set the hammer down slowly, the weight of her words settling between them like dust motes in the afternoon sun. "Rest doesn't come easy out here," he admitted, wiping sawdust from his hands. "But this land remembers kindness, same as it remembers blood." A gust of wind rattled the loose shutter he'd been fixing. Jane cooed on the quilt, tiny hands batting at a sunbeam. Anna's fingers trembled as she draped the damp cloth over the porch rail. The men Tom described, the sharp-eyed one's Silas Rook, the other's his brother Caleb. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "They don't just want me dead. They want Jane erased." Charles stiffened. Behind them, the screen door creaked open. Mary stepped out, her apron pockets heavy with shell casings. "Jed just rode in from the west pasture," she said, her tone deceptively calm. "Saw dust rising near the old Comanche trail. 5 riders, maybe 6. Anna's face went pale, but her hands moved with sudden purpose, scooping up Jane, tucking the knife from her apron into her boot. Charles recognized the look. It was the same one he'd seen in Buffalo right before they charged. Mary tossed Charles his rifle. "They'll hit at sundown," she said. "Always do." The 3 of them moved in silent sync, Mary banking the cook fire, Charles loading extra shells, Anna whispering to Jane as she fashioned a sling from the new cloth. When the baby was secured against her chest, Anna reached into the cedar chest and pulled out Charles's spare Colt. "You know how to use that?" Charles asked. Anna spun the cylinder with practiced ease. "My father taught me to shoot before he taught me to stitch." A crow cawed from the barn roof their sentry. The riders were close now. Charles could feel it in the prickling at his neck, the way the horses had gone still in the corral. As the sun dipped below the ridge, painting the ranch house in long shadows, Anna took up position at the east window. The first gunshot shattered the stillness, kicking up dirt near the water trough. Silas Rook's voice carried across the yard. "Send out the woman McCade. This ain't your fight." Charles chambered around. "Like hell it ain't." Anna's smile was all teeth as she leveled the Colt. "Let's show them how Blackwood women really fight." The last rays of sunlight glinted off the railroad tracks in the distance, a silver scar across the land. Somewhere beyond them, a train whistle blew. But here now, the only sound that mattered was the cocking of hammers and the steady breath of a woman who'd finally found something worth standing her ground for. The corral gate creaked under Charles's grip as Jed's words hung in the still morning air. He didn't need to ask who they were. The tension coiling in his shoulders had been waiting for this moment since Anna first spoke the Blackwood name. Inside the house, Mary moved with grim efficiency. The shotgun came down from its pegs above the hearth shells, clicking into place like a Death Watch Beatles count. Anna stood frozen by the window, Jane's face pressed tight against her shoulder, both their breathing shallow. "Back room," Mary ordered, jerking her head toward the root cellar. "Take the baby and no." Anna's voice cut through like a blade. She handed Jane to Mary before pulling a worn leather holster from beneath the bed, the one Charles hadn't known she'd hidden there. The Colt gleamed as she checked the cylinder. "They want me. Let them come find me." Outside, the first rider emerged from the morning haze, a hulking figure with a shotgun across his saddle. Caleb Blackwood. Behind him rode Silas Rook, his sharp features shadowed by a hat brim pulled low. 3 more men fanned out behind them, their horses kicking up dust that hung like gunpowder smoke in the still air. Charles stepped into the open, his rifle held loose but ready. Far enough, Blackwood. Caleb reined up his grin, revealing a missing front tooth. We just come for what's ours, McCade. The screen door slammed. Anna walked out with the deliberate stride of someone done running the Colt hanging easy at her side. The morning sun caught the silver streaks in her hair new since the rails. Silas stiffened in his saddle. Well, I'll be damned, he drawled. Little sister's still breathing. Anna's finger stroked the trigger. Not your sister, not anymore. A magpie shrieked from the barn roof, the only sound in the sudden silence. Charles saw the exact moment Caleb's finger twitched toward his shotgun. The world exploded in gunfire. Anna's first shot took Caleb clean through the throat. Charles's rifle barked twice, sending two riders tumbling from their saddles. Mary's shotgun roared from the kitchen window, peppering the third man's chest with buckshot. Silas wheeled his horse, but Anna was already moving, sprinting across the yard with her braid, whipping like a battle standard. She fired once, twice the bullets, kicking up dirt at Silas's mount's hooves. You should have made sure of me? She screamed, her voice raw with years of swallowed rage. The last shot struck true. Silas jerked sideways, clutching his shoulder as his horse bolted toward the railroad tracks. Anna didn't chase him, just stood there chest-heaving, watching her brother flee across the same land that had nearly been her grave. The acrid smell of gunpowder mixed with the iron tang of blood in the dirt. Somewhere behind them, Jane began to cry, a living, breathing counterpoint to the death littering the yard. Charles walked to Anna's side, his boots crunching on spent shells. She didn't look at him, just stared at the retreating figure growing smaller in the distance. He'll be back, she said softly. Charles nodded, reloading his rifle with practiced hands. Then we'll be ready. The railroad tracks gleamed in the rising sun, empty now, except for a single crow picking at Caleb Blackwood's outstretched hand. The 3:15 to Cheyenne would come through soon enough, but for now the only sound was the wind through the grass and the steady rhythm of a rocking chair inside the house, where Mary hummed to a baby who'd never know the weight of a Blackwood name. The dust settled over the yard like a shroud as Charles climbed the porch steps. Anna didn't retreat when he stopped before her close enough to see the pulse fluttering at her throat. Jane's tiny fingers curled around the edge of her mother's shawl, the morning sun turning the baby's dark hair to copper. They'll be back with more men, Anna whispered. Charles reached out slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. When his calloused finger brushed Jane's palm, the baby grasped it with surprising strength. Let them come, he said. Behind them, the screen door squeaked open. Mary stood there with two steaming mugs, her gaze sharp as she scanned the horizon. Coffee's hot, she said, thrusting a cup at Anna, and the Winchester's loaded. Anna took the mug with her free hand, the warmth seeping into her chilled fingers. The normalcy of it, the bitter coffee smell mixing with gun oil and baby's milk struck her suddenly. This was what safety felt like. Not the absence of danger, but the certainty of standing your ground. Charles's hand lingered near Jane's, his knuckles brushing Anna's wrist. Neither acknowledged the contact, but neither moved away. Out by the barn, Jed emerged from hiding his freckled face pale under his hat. They really gone, Mr. McCade. For now, Charles said. His eyes met Anna's over the rim of his coffee cup. But we'll be ready when they return. The morning stretched quiet after that. Mary took Jane inside for her nap, while Charles showed Jed how to reinforce the shutters with metal brackets. Anna found herself at the washtub scranging Caleb Blackwood's blood from her good blouse. The water turned pink, then clear. By noon, the only signs of the confrontation were the fresh rifle shells lined up on the windowsill and the way Anna now carried Charles's spare Colt openly on her hip. When the baby woke fussing, Anna didn't jump at the sound, just set aside the laundry, checked the gun's load out of habit, and went inside to feed her daughter. The railroad tracks still gleamed in the distance, but no train whistle blew. Not yet. And when it did, when the Blackwoods came riding hard with vengeance in their hearts, Anna McCade would be waiting. Not the broken woman they'd left for dead on those rails, but a mother with a colt and something worth killing for. Charles watched from the corral as Anna rocked Jane on the porch, her voice soft but steady, as she sang an old lullaby, the same one he realized with a start that his own mother used to sing. Somewhere beyond the ridge, thunder rumbled. A storm was coming, but so was the 3:15 to Cheyenne. The golden light caught the dust motes floating between them as Charles stopped at the foot of the porch steps. Anna's unbound hair shimmered like prairie fire in the sunset. Jane's tiny fist curled tight around one copper strand. For a heartbeat, they simply looked at each other, no words, no pretense. Just the quiet understanding of two people who'd stared down death and chosen to keep living. Mary's voice carried from inside, singing an old hymn as she kneaded dough. The familiar rhythm of it, the way the screen door squeaked on its hinges, the smell of wood smoke and rising bread, made something tighten in Charles's chest. This was what the Blackwoods had tried to steal. Not just lives, but this fragile, ordinary peace. He sank onto the step beside Anna, their shoulders brushing. Jane stirred in her sleep, her rosebud mouth working as if dreaming of milk. "Been thinking," Charles said, his voice rough from the day's work. "That creek cottonwood grove would make good grazing land. Could run 20 head there easy." Anna studied his profile, the sun-weathered lines around his eyes, the quiet determination in his jaw. "You asking my opinion, McCade?" The corner of his mouth lifted. "I reckon I am." Her fingers found his on the sun-warmed wood between them. Not hesitant anymore, but sure. The kind of touch that said more than words ever could. Out by the barn, Jed whooped as he chased a runaway chicken. Mary's laughter floated through the open window. Somewhere beyond the ridge, the 3:15 to Cheyenne whistled as it rounded the bend, but the sound held no terror now. Just the distant hum of a world moving on without them. Charles turned his hand palm up, lacing his fingers through Anna's. The baby sighed between them, her breath sweet with sleep. The Blackwoods would come again. Men like that always did. But when they rode over that ridge, they'd find something they hadn't counted on. Not a frightened woman alone on the prairie, but a family standing together in the golden light of an ordinary evening, with weapons close at hand and nothing left to lose. The sun dipped below the horizon in a blaze of crimson and gold. Somewhere in the gathering dark, a nightingale began to sing. The golden light of late afternoon gilded the corral where Charles stood with the preacher, their hats tipped low against the sun. Anna watched from the porch, the weight of her wedding ring unfamiliar yet comforting on her finger. The blue cotton dress whispered around her legs with each step, no longer the ragged garment she'd been found in, but still bearing the faint scent of lye soap from Mary's washing. Mary appeared beside her, pressing a tin cup of lemonade into her hand. "He built that cradle weeks ago, you know," she said, nodding toward where Jane slept under the cottonwood's dappled shade. "Back when you still jumped at every creak of the floorboards." Anna's throat tightened. She remembered the sound of Charles working late in the barn those nights, the rhythmic scrape of his plane smoothing wood until it was soft as silk. Out by the corral, the preacher mounted his horse, shaking Charles's hand one last time. As he rode past the porch, he tipped his hat to Anna. "Ma'am, you've got a good man there." She met his gaze squarely. "I know." The words settled into her bones with quiet certainty. This was no desperate bargain struck for survival. The man walking toward her now, his shirt sleeves rolled up over sun-browned forearms, his eyes crinkling at the corners, as Jed raced past him with a squawking chicken, had proven himself in 100 small ways since that first day on the tracks. Charles reached for her hand as he stepped onto the porch, his palm rough but gentle. "Preacher says we might get rain next week." Anna smiled, threading her fingers through his. "Good. The garden could use it." It was an ordinary moment, the kind she'd once taken for granted. But now she savored it, the warmth of his skin, the way Mary hummed as she cleared the table, even Jed's whoops as he terrorized the poultry. This was her life now. Not just survival, but living. Somewhere beyond the ridge, a train whistle blew the 3:15 to Cheyenne, right on schedule. But Anna didn't flinch, just leaned into Charles's shoulder and watched the first fireflies blink to life in the gathering dusk. The Blackwoods might still be out there. The railroad would keep running. But here, under a sky stretching endless and free, Anna McCade had finally found what the West promised all along, not just a place to stand, but a place to belong. And God help anyone who tried to take it from her again. The prairie stretched endless under the fading sun as Anna stood with Charles on the weathered porch, their hands intertwined like the roots of the old cottonwood shading their home. The baby's breath rose soft and steady from the cradle between them, a sound more precious than gold in this hard land. Mary's voice carried from inside as she scolded Jed for tracking dirt across her clean floor, the ordinary grumble of family life. Somewhere beyond the pasture, a lone coyote yipped at the first stars blinking to life. Charles's thumb brushed Anna's wedding band, still new enough to catch the light. No fancy gold, just simple steel forged from the same railroad that had nearly taken everything. "You ever wonder," Anna murmured, "what might have happened if you'd taken the other trail that day?" Charles studied the darkening horizon where the rails still gleamed. "Only to thank God I didn't." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of Mary's honeysuckle vine and the distant iron tang of the tracks. Anna didn't flinch at the smell anymore. Some scars never fade, but they stop defining you. Inside, Jed's laughter spilled through the window as Mary pretended to chase him with a broom. Jane stirred in her sleep, one tiny fist curling, as if grasping at dreams. Charles squeezed Anna's hand. "Supper's ready." She followed him inside, pausing to trail her fingers over Jane's downy head. The lantern light painted the walls gold, the table set with Mary's blue china and a sprig of wildflowers in a jar. Outside, the 3:15 to Cheyenne whistled as it rounded the distant bend, no longer a scream of terror, just another note in the symphony of their lives. The West was built on second chances, on blood and dust and stubborn hope. And as Anna took her place at the table between the man who'd risked everything and the child who'd made it all matter, she knew the best stories weren't about surviving. They were about coming home. The prairie wind howled like a wounded animal as Elias McCade dragged the woman and infant clear of the screaming train, their bodies hitting the parched earth as iron wheels thundered past. The baby's cry was lost in the roar of the locomotive, its hot wind whipping the mother's torn dress like a surrender flag. "Can you stand?" Elias shouted over the din, his arm locked around her waist. The woman Lillian, he'd learn later, responded by vomiting onto his boots. Her legs gave way completely, but her arms never loosened around the squalling newborn. The train's caboose whipped by its slipstream, pelting them with gravel. Elias didn't wait for permission. He scooped them both up, the baby's heat searing through his shirt, Lillian's dead weight nearly toppling him. 20 yards from the tracks, his knees hit dirt. Lillian came alive, suddenly clawing at his arms. "They're watching!" She rasped, her voice raw as fresh meat. Elias followed her wild gaze to the ridge. 3 riders silhouetted against the dying sun. Even at this distance, he recognized the jagged B brand on the lead horse's flank. Blackwood. The largest rider raised a rifle in mocking salute before disappearing over the crest. Lillian's fingers dug into Elias's forearm, her eyes twin pools of terror. "They wanted the train to finish it," she whispered, "so there'd be no bullet to trace." The baby wailed again, its tiny face purple with outrage. Elias unwrapped the filthy swaddling and froze. Wrapped around the infant's chest was a man's wedding band on a leather cord, the inside engraved with words that turned his blood to ice. "To Caleb, Forever yours, Lillian. The pieces clicked together with brutal clarity. This wasn't just some random attack. The woman in his arms was Blackwood's kin, and the baby? Lillian's cracked lips parted. She's his, she confirmed, watching his face. His blood, but not his child. A gunshot echoed in the distance, not aimed at them, but deliberate. A reminder. Elias tucked the ring into his pocket and lifted them both again. His ranch was 3 miles northeast. The Blackwoods would expect him to run there. So he turned due west instead toward the one place even outlaws feared, the abandoned Comanche caves in Dead Man's Gulch. As twilight bled across the prairie, the baby's cries dwindled to whimpers. Lillian's head lolled against his shoulder, her breath shallow. Somewhere behind them a coyote yipped. Or maybe it was a signal. Either way, Elias knew the rules of this game. The hunt was on. This is where the real story begins. Drop a hearts if you want the next chapter. And remember, out here, the most dangerous predators walk on 2 legs. The bay mare's sides heaved as Elias reined up at the ranch gate, the woman limp in his arms, and the baby's whimpers growing weaker. Mary came running, her sun-faded dress whipping around her legs, her sharp eyes taking in the rope burns, the blood-crusted wrists, the way the infant's tiny chest fluttered like a wounded bird. Lord Almighty, she breathed, but her hands were already moving, one supporting the woman's lolling head, the other unwrapping the baby's soiled swaddling. Her nose wrinkled at the stench of train smoke and dried milk. This child ain't eaten in hours. Elias didn't waste words. Blackwoods did this. He jerked his chin toward the unconscious woman. That's Caleb's wife. Mary's head snapped up. The hell you say? The baby chose that moment to wail a reedy sound that shook Elias more than gunfire ever had. Mary tucked the infant against her shoulder with the ease of a woman who'd raised 5 brothers. Get her inside, she ordered, already striding toward the house. And Elias? She paused at the porch steps, her silhouette black against the dying light. Saddle the roan. Jed needs to ride for Doc Henderson. Elias hesitated, his gaze darting to the western ridge. They'll be watching the roads. Then he'll go cross-country like his pants are on fire. Mary's voice brooked no argument. This baby won't last till morning without milk. Inside, the kerosene lamps threw wild shadows as Elias laid the woman on the spare bed. Her eyelids fluttered, but didn't open. Up close, he could see the bruises flowering along her jaw, finger-shaped fresh. The wedding band around the baby's neck seemed to burn against his chest where he'd tucked it. Mary appeared, with a rag soaked in whiskey. Talk, she demanded, dabbing at the woman's wounds. Elias kept his voice low. Found her tied to the rails, Blackwood's men watching from the ridge. He hesitated. Baby's not his. Mary's hands stilled for half a heartbeat before resuming their work. That explains the railroad instead of a bullet. She peeled back the woman's collar, revealing a livid brand below her collarbone, a crude B seared into flesh, marked like cattle. Sweet Jesus. The baby's cries turned frantic. Mary swore and thrust her at Elias. Hold her while I fix a sugar tit and check the windows. The tiny body trembled in his arms, lighter than a newborn calf. Elias found himself rocking instinctively, his calloused thumb brushing the downy head as he moved through the house, securing shutters. Through the kitchen window, the first stars winked coldly over Dead Man's Gulch. Somewhere out there, Silas Rook was circling, and when he struck, Elias would be ready. The real fight begins now. Drop A in the comments if you want the next chapter where whiskey becomes medicine, a sugar tit turns into a lifeline, and the Blackwoods learn some women can't be erased. The whiskey-soaked rag slipped from Anna's fingers as she jolted awake, her body screaming in protest. The room swam kerosene lamplight, rough-hewn beams, the metallic tang of blood still in her mouth. Then she saw her. Mary sat in the rocking chair, humming low and steady, Jane cradled against her breast. The sight punched the air from Anna's lungs. Easy now. Mary murmured without looking up. Her work-roughened fingers adjusted the sugar tit, a scrap of linen soaked in milk and honey against the baby's lips. This one's got her daddy's stubborn chin. Anna's hands flew to her empty belly. The movement sent white-hot pain through her ribs. She's hungry as a wolf pup, Mary finished. She rose with the easy grace of a woman who'd nursed everything from orphaned calves to her own brothers. But strong, like her mama. The baby's tiny fingers curled around Mary's thumb as she transferred her to Anna's arms. The weight, that precious, impossible weight, brought hot tears Anna couldn't blink away. Jane smelled of lye soap and fresh milk, her dark hair now clean and soft against Anna's cheek. Boots scuffed in the doorway. Charles stood hat in hand, his shadow stretching across the braided rug. Sunlight glinted off the colt at his hip, the same one he'd used to cut her free. "You're safe here," he said, quieter than a man his size had any right to be. Anna studied the rope burns on her wrists, the clean bandages Mary had wrapped around them. Safe was a word for women who hadn't been branded like cattle. She opened her mouth to say what she wasn't sure when a commotion erupted outside. Hoofbeats, shouting. Charles was at the window in 2 strides, his body blocking the view. "Jed's back early." The tension in his shoulders said more than words ever could. Mary moved first, snatching the shotgun from above the hearth. "Doc, with him." "Just the boy, and he's riding hard." Anna clutched Jane closer. The Blackwoods didn't give up prey so easily. She'd seen Caleb burn a homestead to the ground because the farmer dared to look him in the eye. Charles met her gaze across the room, his eyes reflecting the lamplight like banked coals. "Whatever comes," he said, nodding toward the rifle leaning by the door. "You're not alone in this fight." Outside, Jed's horse skidded to a stop in a cloud of dust. His shout turned Anna's blood to ice. "They're coming, and they brought the whole damn gang." The storm is here. Drop a in the comments if you want the next chapter where a frontier woman's vengeance burns hotter than a prairie fire, and the Blackwoods learn some lines shouldn't be crossed. The prairie wind carried the scent of burning sage as Anna stood vigil at the fence line, Jane's warm weight, a constant reminder of what was at stake. Charles's shadow fell across her, his hands still bearing the fresh resin scent of repaired harness leather. "Smoke's closer tonight," he observed, voice pitched low. Anna didn't flinch. She'd smelled it too, that acrid tang cutting through the evening air. Not just campfires. Burning lumber. The Blackwoods were torching their way across the territory. Inside the cabin, Mary's laughter mingled with Jed's excited chatter as she taught him to make sourdough biscuits. The normalcy of it made Anna's throat tighten. How long before those sounds were swallowed by gunfire? Charles leaned against the fence post, his shoulder brushing hers. Jed found fresh tracks near the North Creek. 6 riders, maybe 7. Jane stirred in her sling, tiny fingers curling against Anna's collarbone, right over the jagged B brand hidden beneath her dress. The pain had long faded, but the memory hadn't. Caleb's whiskey breath as he pressed the hot iron to her skin, hissing, "You'll wear my mark in hell." "They're coming for the baby," Anna whispered. Not just to kill, but to erase. A half-Blackwood heir was a threat Silas would never tolerate. Charles turned his work-roughened fingers unexpectedly gentle as they tilted her chin up. "Look at me." Moonlight caught the silver at his temples, the hard set of his jaw. "That child's got your blood, but she's got McCade protection now." A gunshot cracked in the distance. Then another, closer this time. Anna's pulse roared in her ears, but her voice came out steel steady. "I need a rifle." Charles didn't hesitate. Mary's got the Winchester cleaned and loaded. His calloused thumb brushed Jane's downy head. And the root cellars dug deep. The kitchen window glowed yellow as Mary appeared, holding up a freshly baked biscuit. The sight should have been comforting. Instead, it sent ice through Anna's veins. Because silhouetted against that warm light were 3 riders cresting the eastern ridge. Charles's hand found the small of her back. Time to go inside, Anna. She took one last look at the encroaching darkness, at the pinpricks of torchlight now visible in the distance. The Blackwoods thought they were hunting prey. They were about to learn what happens when a cornered mother becomes the hunter. The reckoning begins at sundown. Drop A in the comments if you're ready for the next chapter, where frontier justice comes with a trigger squeeze, and a woman's vengeance burns hotter than branding iron. The last light of day bled across the porch as Anna stared at the horizon, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup, Charles's cup, really the heavy ceramic one he always used, before handing it to her without comment. The whiskey-laced coffee had gone cold, but she kept turning it in her hands, focusing on the chip near the handle, rather than the words still hanging between them. Two men asking after a woman with a baby. Mary's voice carried through the screen door as she scolded Jed for tracking mud across her clean floor. The normalcy of it felt like a slap. Charles leaned against the porch post, his silhouette dark against the fading sun. Tom said they wore Blackwood brands. His voice was quiet, but each word landed like a horseshoe on anvil. One had a silver-starred hat. Anna's breath hitched. The cup nearly slipped from her fingers. Silas Rook, Caleb's enforcer, the man who'd held her down while She set the cup down with deliberate care, the click of ceramic on wood, louder than a gunshot in the heavy air. When she finally spoke, her voice surprised her calm steady, like the still center of a tornado. "They'll come at night." Her fingers found the knife in her apron pocket, its edge honed razor-sharp after days of secret wetting. Silas always preferred the dark. Charles didn't move, but she felt his attention sharpen. How many? 6, maybe 8? Her thumb tested the knife's point. "They'll send 2 around back while the rest set fire to the barn." A log shifted in the hearth inside, sending up a shower of sparks. Somewhere in the pasture a horse whickered nervously. Charles pushed off the post, his boots scuffing the worn boards, as he turned to face her fully. The dying light caught the steel in his gaze. "You knew this would happen." It wasn't an accusation, just a fact, heavy as a coffin lid. Anna met his eyes without flinching. "I knew." The unspoken words hung between them. "I should have left. I should have run." But they both knew the truth. The Blackwoods would have hunted her to the ends of the earth. And now they'd brought death to his doorstep. Charles surprised her then. He reached out his calloused fingers, brushing the brand hidden beneath her high collar. "We'll be ready." "Not you should go. Not this isn't your fight." "We." Inside, Jane let out a sleepy gurgle. Anna's heart clenched. She'd spent weeks memorizing the rhythm of this Ranch Mary's biscuit recipe. Jed's endless chatter, the way Charles's shirt smelled of sage and saddle soap when he hung them to dry. Now she'd either defend it or die on its soil. As if sensing her thoughts, Charles touched the colt at his hip. "Mary's got the root cellar stocked. Jed knows the back trails." Anna nodded, her fingers tightening around the knife. "Let them come. Let Silas Rook see what happened when you tried to burn a woman who'd already survived the fire." The first coyote howl cut through the twilight too close to be wild. Charles didn't even blink. Sunset in 20 minutes. Anna rose, her shadow stretching long across the porch. Time to load the rifles. The final reckoning begins at nightfall. Drop A in the comments if you want the explosive conclusion where a mother's vengeance meets frontier justice, and the Blackwoods learn some fires can't be controlled. The rifle oil clung to Charles's fingers as he stood on the darkened porch, the scent mixing with the approaching storm's electricity. Anna's silent presence beside him was as palpable as the weight of the colt against his hip. Moonlight silvered the prairie, illuminating 2 riders approaching at a walk, not the reckless charge of an attack, but the deliberate pace of men expecting surrender. Charles didn't need to squint to recognize Silas Rook's angular silhouette or the hulking shape of Caleb Blackwood beside him. Anna's breath hitched. Her fingers found Charles's sleeve, not trembling but gripping like a lifeline. They want me to see them coming, she whispered. Charles nodded. Psychological warfare. Let the prey sweat before the kill. But these men didn't know they were hunting wolves. Inside, Mary's rocking chair creaked as she hummed to Jane, the sound deliberately normal. Jed's shadow moved behind the kitchen curtain. The boy had his instructions. The riders reined up 50 yards out. Silas tipped his hat back, the moonlight catching the cruel twist of his smile. Evening, McCade. We come for what's ours. Charles stepped off the porch, his boots crunching on gravel. Your stock's not on my land, Blackwood. Caleb spat tobacco into the dirt. Ain't here for cattle. His gaze slid past Charles to Anna. That's my wife and child. Anna moved, then stepping into the light with Jane cradled against her. The baby's whimper cut through the night. I stopped being your wife when you tied me to those rails, Caleb. Silas chuckled, the sound like dry bones rattling. Law says different. He patted his saddlebag. Got the papers right here. Now hand her over, for this gets ugly. Charles felt, rather than saw, Anna's hand slip beneath her shawl. He'd given her the Derringer this afternoon, small but deadly at close range. The only thing leaving this ranch tonight, Charles said, shifting his weight slightly to the left, putting himself between Anna and Silas's rifle, is you two, breathing or not. Your choice. A coyote yipped in the distance. Or maybe it was Jed's signal. Silas's smile vanished. His hand dropped to his revolver. The gunshot came from the barn loft. Silas's hat went spinning as Mary's rifle barked again, kicking up dirt at his horse's feet. Chaos erupted. The final showdown begins now. Drop A in the comments if you want the explosive conclusion where lead flies faster than lies and the prairie runs red before dawn. The metallic click of Charles's rifle hammer echoed across the yard like a death knell. The bearded outlaw, Caleb Blackwood himself, froze mid-reach for his pistol, his bloodshot eyes widening in genuine surprise. This wasn't how their raids usually went. Inside the house, a curtain twitched. Anna's pale face flashed at the window, her mouth moving in silent warning. Charles didn't need to hear the words. He'd spent the last week learning to read the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands clenched when danger neared. The thin rider, Silas Rook, let out a wheezing laugh that smelled of rotten teeth and cheaper whiskey. Hell, Caleb. This sodbuster thinks he's a rifle shot cracked from the barn loft. Silas's hat spun off his head as Mary's bullet grazed his scalp. Next one goes between your eyes, the old woman shouted, her voice carrying across the suddenly too quiet yard. Chaos erupted. Caleb's horse reared as he went for his revolver. Charles's first shot took the animal in the chest, a mercy killing that sent the outlaw crashing into the dirt. The other riders scattered like quail, but not before Anna appeared on the porch, Charles's spare colt steady in both hands. You forgot something, husband. She called, her voice ringing clear as a church bell. The Derringer she'd hidden in her shawl barked twice. Caleb screamed as one bullet shattered his kneecap, the other burrowing into his thigh. Silas scrambled for cover behind a water trough, his shotgun barking wild. Splinters exploded from the porch rail near Anna's face. She didn't flinch, just dropped behind the rain barrel and reloaded with practiced ease. Charles saw the moment Silas made his fatal mistake. The outlaw's eyes darted toward the root cellar door, where Jed had just emerged, with a double-barreled shotgun too big for his skinny arms. No! Charles roared, but Silas was already swinging his weapon toward the boy. Anna moved faster. Her bullet took Silas through the throat just as Mary's second shot punched through his chest. The outlaw crumpled like a puppet with cut strings, his dying fingers spasming on the trigger. The shotgun blast went wide, peppering the chicken coop with buckshot. In the sudden silence, Caleb's moans were the only sound. Charles approached cautiously, his rifle trained on the man who'd branded his own wife. Anna stepped off the porch, her bare feet leaving bloody prints in the dust. The morning sun caught the tears streaming down her face, not from fear, but from the terrible freedom settling in her bones. Jane's wail pierced the gunpowder haze. And just like that, the West got a little quieter. a little kinder. The final reckoning is complete. Drop A in the comments if this frontier justice satisfied, and stay tuned for our next tale of grit and redemption under the big sky. The last crimson light of day bled across the prairie as Anna leaned into Charles's solid warmth, Jane's rhythmic breathing, a quiet counterpoint to the distant coyote calls. The rifle still leaned against the porch post. Within arm's reach, some habits died hard in the west. Mary's voice carried through the open window as she scolded Jed for tracking dirt across her clean floor. "You'd think we didn't just have a gunfight this morning," Anna murmured, her lips curling at the edges. Charles's chuckle vibrated through his chest where her head rested. That woman would tidy up the gates of hell if given half a chance. A comfortable silence settled between them, the kind that needed no words. Anna's fingers absently traced the fresh bandage on Charles's forearm where Silas's stray shot had grazed him. The motion stirred something in her chest, not the sharp terror of before, but something warmer, more enduring. Jane stirred with a soft whimper, her tiny fingers curling into Anna's dress. Charles reached over instinctively, his work-roughened hand dwarfing the baby's head as he adjusted her blanket. The simple gesture sent an unexpected pang through Anna. "You're good with her," she said softly. Charles's hand stilled. Had practice. Helped raise Mary's boys after her husband passed. His thumb brushed Jane's cheek. "This one's got your spirit, though." The unspoken words hung between them. "She's staying. You're staying." Anna studied the man beside her, the sun-weathered lines at his eyes, the quiet strength in his shoulders. Not a knight from some storybook, but a real man who'd faced down the Blackwoods without hesitation. A shooting star streaked across the darkening sky. Mary would call it an omen. Anna just tightened her grip on Charles's arm. Somewhere beyond the ridge, the 315 to Cheyenne whistled as it rounded the bend, no longer a sound of terror, just another note in the symphony of their lives. The West might not promise happy endings, but it offered something better, a chance to stand your ground, to choose your family, to build something that would last. And as Jane's tiny fingers curled around Charles's calloused thumb, Anna knew this was only the beginning. The frontier gives no second chances, except when it does. Let us know in the comments if you'd ride with this family again, and don't forget to subscribe for more untamed tales of the American West. The morning of the wedding dawned crisp as a new apple sunlight filtering through the cottonwoods like liquid gold. Anna stood at the bedroom window watching Charles in the yard below as he brushed down the bay mare, his movements steady and sure. The simple gold band he'd given her, forged from Silas Rook's melted-down pocket watch, warmed against her skin beneath the high collar of Mary's borrowed blue dress. "You look like sunrise," Mary said, adjusting the wildflower crown she'd woven before dawn. Her hands lingered at Anna's shoulders. "He's a good man." Anna smoothed the dress over hips that had grown leaner in these hard months. "I know." The words came easier now. Outside, Jed whooped as he chased chickens from the makeshift aisle, 2 ropes of braided sweetgrass leading to the ancient cottonwood where the preacher waited. Jane gurgled in Mary's arms, her tiny fists batting at the lace trim of her christening gown. Charles turned, then his gaze finding Anna through the window, as if he'd known she'd be there. The smile that broke across his weathered face could have lit the whole territory. Anna's breath caught. This was no desperate bargain for protection. This was choice. This was coming home. The screen door squeaked as she stepped onto the porch. Charles met her at the bottom step, his work-roughened fingers brushing hers. No words passed between them, none were needed. The preacher's voice mingled with the creek's murmur as they walked toward the tree together, their boots leaving twin tracks in the dew-heavy grass. "Dearly beloved," the words washed over Anna like a balm. This time the vows would hold, not because they were spoken before God, but because they'd already been proven in blood and dust and the quiet moments before dawn. When Charles slid the ring onto her finger, a simple band forged from railroad steel, Anna didn't flinch at its weight. Let it be a reminder what was meant to break her had instead become the foundation of something unshakable. The kiss was brief, just a brush of lips, but it carried the promise of 1,000 tomorrows. Jed whooped, Mary sniffled, and Jane, ever the impatient one, chose that moment to fill her diaper with dramatic flair. As laughter rippled through their small gathering, Anna leaned into Charles's solid warmth. Somewhere beyond the ridge, the 3:15 to Cheyenne whistled no longer a herald of terror, but a distant echo of the past. The preacher packed his Bible. Mary shooed them toward the wedding feast, a spread that included Jed's infamous Lucky Biscuits. And as the sun climbed higher, painting their faces in dappled light, Anna McCade finally understood. The West didn't forgive, it didn't forget. But for those willing to stand their ground, it just might let you build something beautiful in the cracks. Every ending is a new beginning. Let us know in the comments if this frontier love story touched your heart, and don't forget to hit subscribe for more tales of grit and redemption under the big sky. The last golden light of evening gilded the prairie as Anna stood on the porch, Charles's hand warm in hers. The preacher's horse had long disappeared down the trail, but the scent of Mary's apple pie still lingered in the air, mixing with the earthy perfume of the coming night. Jane stirred in her cradle, the one Charles had crafted with hands more accustomed to breaking mustangs than soothing babies. Anna smiled at the way the cedar bore tiny tooth marks along the rim, Jed's helpful additions during construction. "You're studying that cradle like it might grow legs." Charles murmured, his thumb brushing her wedding band, the railroad steel cool against her skin, even after hours of wear. Anna leaned back against his chest, watching the fireflies begin their evening dance over the pasture. "Just thinking how strange it is," she said softly, "that something so beautiful could come from something so broken." Charles's arms tightened around her. In the distance, the faint whistle of the 3:15 to Cheyenne carried on the breeze no longer a sound of terror, but a reminder of how far they'd come. Mary's voice carried through the open window as she taught Jed the proper way to wring a chicken's neck, her tone suggesting this was the 5th attempt. Jane cooed in her sleep, kicking off the blanket Mary had knit from yarn the color of prairie sage. Anna turned in Charles's arms, her fingers tracing the sun-weathered lines at his eyes, lines that deepened when he smiled at her like this. No words were needed. The vows they'd spoken today were just formality. The real promises had been made in 100 small moments, since that fateful day on the tracks, in shared sunrises and silent watches, in the way he'd learned to swaddle a baby with his rough rancher's hands. Somewhere beyond the ridge, the world kept turning. The Blackwood name still carried weight in certain territories. The railroad still cut its relentless path across the land. But here, in this golden moment suspended between day and night, Anna McCade finally understood what it meant to be rooted. Not just in place, but in purpose. In love. Charles pressed a kiss to her forehead as the first stars blinked awake above them. The porch light cast their intertwined shadows long across the yard, one shape now unbroken. Every ending plants the seed for a new beginning. Let us know in the comments how this frontier love story moved you. And don't forget to subscribe for more tales of courage and redemption under the western sky. The next campfire tale begins soon.